300,000 years ago, no borders, no nations, no name for the planet we live on. Earth at that time was unlike anything imagined by modern humans. No cities, no roads, no written language, no concept of past or future, only the present, and life struggling against nature. In Europe, cold from the far north spread down like giant claws. Ice sheets, hundreds of meters tall, crawl through valleys, crushing everything beneath them. Winter temperatures could drop below -30 degrees. Vegetation was scarce. Animals could survive only by migrating or adapting to the extreme. In Asia, the ground still cracked under thermal pressure. Volcanoes raged from the Baikal region to the Central Asian plateau. Lava flows incinerated forests. Volcanic ash blanketed the ground, choking any creature that didn't escape in time. Meanwhile, in Africa, primeval rainforests covered most of the continent. Moisture rose every hour, creating near-total humidity. In the dense canopy, the struggle for survival was constant. Humans had not yet mastered this place. They were just one small creature in the food chain, competing with leopards, snakes, monkeys, and other predators. This was Earth before human hands had shaped it. No lights, no concrete, no satellite signals. Only rain, wind, rock, fire, and life testing itself. This period belongs to the Pleistocene epoch, a span of over 2 million years marked by repeated ice ages. Global temperatures fluctuated violently. Each deep freeze brought ecological collapse, species loss, and massive migrations. No creature could stay still. Those that didn't move died. Those that didn't adapt went extinct. In that context, bipedal creatures began to rise. Homo erectus, a distant ancestor, had learned to make tools. Homo heidelbergensis hunted in small groups. Neanderthals, stocky, cold-adapted, lived mainly in Europe. And Homo sapiens, still in their earliest stage in East Africa. They didn't know they were human. No concept of species. No written language to name themselves. Only instinct. Survive, reproduce, avoid predators, remember the way back to the nest. They didn't yet have fire, but they had memory. No writing, but there was repetition. No history, but there were memories, passed on through behavior, glances, the way they moved, avoided beasts, and protected their young. The world 300,000 years ago was not a page in an ancient book. It is living evidence, written in stone, in bones, in DNA, and in the way humans today still respond to nature. When the earth is peeled back, when stone tools are unearthed, when ancient skeletons are excavated, a story appears. Not a story of a dead past, but a reminder that we, humankind, were once small, once voiceless, once fragile against nature. And from that fragility, intelligence was born. Memory became a tool. Fear turned into knowledge. We are not the masters of this earth. We are just a species, and we once lived on a planet with no name. Art 2. The Ice Age still reigns. 300,000 years ago, Earth was still deep in the Pleistocene, a period known as one of the most extreme climate epochs in the planet's history. This was a time when modern humans had only just begun to emerge, but were not yet central to any ecosystem. The global climate fluctuated dramatically in cycles of glacial and interglacial periods. That year, and for thousands of years after, Earth remained in a deep freeze cycle. Glaciers expanded, biodiversity contracted, and life was forced to change. In the northern hemisphere, ice sheets from the Arctic spread downward, covering much of what is now Europe. Northern Germany, the Netherlands, Poland, Scandinavia, all lay under ice hundreds of meters thick. These glaciers didn't just cool the climate, they reshaped the land, eroded mountains, redirected rivers, and tore apart valleys. Global sea levels were about 100 meters lower than today. Areas that are now sea, like the Bering Strait, were dry land. It became a natural land bridge between Asia and North America. The idea of continents at this time was not fixed. Global geography shifted every few thousand years. Deserts still existed, but they weren't hot deserts. They were cold deserts, where the wind carried not sand, but dry, frozen snowflakes, sharp as razors. Night temperatures could drop to -40 degrees. There were no trees, no liquid water, only life surviving at the edge of its limits. The climate palette of this era had only two dominant colors: white, from ice and snow, black, from volcanic ash. Earth was a place of extreme opposites, paralyzing cold and destructive heat. Tectonic plates were still shifting. Volcanoes remained active across Asia, East Africa, and the Pacific Rim. Black columns of ash rose into the sky, blanketing the land in thick layers of soot, killing forests and altering the weather for years. Amid these extremes, there was one exception: East Africa. Here the land wasn't buried in ice, it wasn't overrun by snow, but it was not stable either. East Africa's climate at the time was arid and volatile. Rainy seasons came quickly and ended just as fast. Dry seasons stretched on, with water evaporating faster than it could accumulate. Freshwater sources were unstable. Forests gradually gave way to grasslands. The grasslands were fractured by geological rifts and shifting rivers. It was here, in a harsh yet not wholly destructive environment, that Homo sapiens began to appear. Not by strength, not by speed, but by one unique ability: memory. Humans walked across the savanna, not to conquer, but to follow. They noticed the damp footprints of an animal. They recognized fresh blood on the grass. They understood that a low, broken branch meant herbivores, while high, twisted branches meant predators stalking. Humans were not the only species that moved, but they were the first to link information in sequence. Not just seeing, but understanding. Not just hearing, but remembering. Not just running, but predicting. In places that are now Lake Turkana, Lake Victoria, the Omo Valley, and the Kenyan Highlands, the first groups of Homo sapiens began to form collective behavior. They didn't yet control fire, but they had basic social structure: trackers, lookouts, elders watching children. They didn't have language as we know it, but in eye movements, pointing gestures, howls, there were the first units of communication. A sound signaling danger, a motion for retreat, a gesture indicating the direction of a he. Memory, vigilance, and cooperation became their main weapons. No long fangs, no claws, no speed, but they had strategy. They had roles. They reused information. Humans began to be creatures that waited, not just reacted. They lay still, waiting for the wind to change. They hid in the dark to avoid predators. They waited until the antelope drew near, then struck with a crude, stone-tipped spear. It was in places like East Africa, a semi-harsh, semi-favorable environment where adaptability began to evolve into an advantage. Humans had not yet left Africa, but they were ready. The Ice Age still ruled the Earth, but in the small cracks of climate, tiny creatures found ways to survive, and among them was one species that wouldn't just survive. They would remember. They would depart. They would spread across the world. Art 3. The silent characters of history. 300,000 years ago, humans were not the center of the world. Not rulers. Not masters of nature. Not shapers of the biosphere. Humans were a small part, one among hundreds of animal species, many of which were larger, faster, and more dangerous. Woolly mammoths still walked the land, moving in herds of dozens, each weighing up to 6 tons. Their curved tusks resembled snow-covered branches. Each step left deep prints in the frozen ground. Cave lions, mainly living in Europe, were up to 25% larger than today's African lions. Maneless, colder, faster, hunting in packs. Saber-toothed cats, with fangs up to 20 centimeters long, could take down a horse in seconds. Short-faced bears, standing nearly 3 meters tall, were the largest land carnivores of that era. Giant hyenas, with jaws that could crush bone, hunted at night in packs. In this ecosystem, humans, whether Neanderthal or Homo sapiens, were not at the top of the food chain. They weren't the only hunters, and often they were prey. At night, sleeping in the wrong place, near water, close to predator trails, without a guard, could mean the group vanishing overnight. By morning, only footprints, bloodstains, and drag marks on the damp earth remained. Life was not about conquest. It was about avoidance, response, and memory. Where the fire ant nests were, where the snake dens lay, when the wind would shift, what hour the hyenas usually appeared. All of this was remembered, not in writing, but in collective memory. At the edge of life and death, human groups still managed to survive, not through advanced weapons, but through organization, simple but effective. Children were born in crevices, caves, in the warmest spots of a shelter. They were wrapped in animal skins, breastfed, and slept against adult bodies for warmth. No blankets, no beds, but there were arms. There was collective warmth. The elderly no longer hunted. They walked slowly, hands trembled, old fractures ached with the cold. But they were living memory, the ones who could recall the escape path when tigers gave chase, who remembered the spot where water once pooled in the dry season 4 years ago, who warned that cliff drops rocks when it rains hard. They divided the roasted meat from the hunt. They kept the fire burning through the night. They taught the young how to sharpen sticks, how to hear the wing beats of birds when a predator approached. In the caves, when the rock walls were dry, they painted handprints, animals, symbols resembling maps, not art for admiration, but a memory system, where danger lurked, what season yielded game, which group had passed through here. Those markings were history, not written in letters, but in symbols, not recorded in language, but in repeated behavior. There were no epics, no schools, no official religions, but there were rituals, sharing meat, recounting the hunt, passing tools from hand to hand. There was language not yet spoken, eye contact, gestures, rhythmic knocks on stone. There was communal memory, scars, howls, fading trails in the mist. Each group was a survival unit, and each person a piece of living data. No one was great. No one's name was carved into stone, but everyone was a character in a history with no words. What mattered wasn't how many beasts were killed, but how many winters were survived. Not who was strongest, but who remembered longest. And when an elder passed away, the group didn't just lose a member. They lost a storehouse of knowledge, a mental map, a living history. Humans of that time left no books, no monuments, but they left behind stone tools, fire, primitive drawings, and cooperative behavior. Something no other species of that era had achieved at such a level. They were the silent characters, uncelebrated, unrecognized, but without them, there would be no us. Part 4. Earth was not like today. 300,000 years ago, Earth was not a simpler version of today. It was a different ecosystem. Its geographic structure was relatively similar to now, but its internal content was entirely different. The continents were nearly in their current positions, but pathways between regions were not yet disrupted by rising seas. Many lands now submerged were still dry. Britain was not an island. It was connected to mainland Europe by a frozen land bridge where lions, elephants, and even rhinoceroses migrated seasonally. Southern England was once a hunting ground for cave lions. No castles, no people, only animal tracks on the cold mud and roars echoing through dense forests. Australia was an isolated continent, but had never seen a human footprint. Up to this point, there is no evidence that any Homo species had reached it. Its fauna was entirely endemic, evolving separately. Marsupials like kangaroos and diprotodons, a massive species the size of a car, roamed freely, never having seen a two-legged predator. The Americas had no humans. This land belonged to short-faced bears, giant ground sloths, and the North American giraffe, a now extinct species. Fields had not yet been carved into farmland. Plains were unfenced. Only native animals wandered, bred, and died with the seasons. This world had no electric lights, no roads, no buildings, but it functioned according to a deeper rhythm. Each rainy season came. Grass grew, antelope gave birth, birds returned to the marshes. Then came the dry season. Grass withered, animals searched for water, forests burned from natural lightning. When the soil became fertile again, the cycle restarted. All of it occurred without the human hand. All of it ran on Earth's rules, precise, ruthless, unforgiving. In that environment, humans, whether Homo sapiens or Neanderthals, had no choice but to observe, remember, and adapt. There were no tools to measure the weather, but they knew which direction gray clouds meant rain. There were no topographic maps, but they remembered where waterlogged roots once grew. No clocks, but when cicadas sang in the late afternoon, it meant the herds would soon return to the stream. Human life was tied to Earth's logic. Grass growing, being eaten, decaying, becoming new soil. Rain arrived and formed streams. Streams broke into channels. Channels collected water into springs, which became rivers. Rivers rose, carried away soil, deposited silt on floodplains, and the cycle continued. Humans did not stand above this system. They were a part of it. They didn't try to control nature. They didn't destroy it. They simply learned how to blend into it, to survive. Every behavior, where to sleep, where to set a trap, where to place a fire, was dictated by nature. They didn't build shelters on animal migration paths. They didn't burn forests during peak dry season. They didn't hunt animals raising their young. Humans existed as biological beings, learning constantly. They had no ideology of dominating nature. The concept of control did not exist. They existed by observing, remembering, avoiding mistakes, and learning from death. Those who didn't look to the sky in time died of thirst. Those who didn't notice herds migrating starved. Those who slept in the wrong spot were killed by predators. That world had no heroes, no rulers, only awareness and long-term memory as a form of intelligence that needed no school. 300,000 years, a span of time long enough to erase all memories, all footprints, all sounds that once echoed on Earth. No one remains to tell the story. No one knows for sure the faces, the voices, or the thoughts of those first humans. But the world is not entirely silent. Beneath thick layers of soil, volcanic ash, and sediment, a few scattered remnants persist. Tiny fragments, yet enough to declare that they once existed. A stone-tipped spearhead embedded in the hip bone of a prehistoric horse. Not a random injury, but evidence of an organized hunt where humans did not act alone, but coordinated in groups to take down prey many times their size. A handprint on a rock wall in Sulawesi, Indonesia. Not artistic decoration, but a primal declaration of presence. I was here. The most primitive form of language, a silent gesture of human identity before words existed. A charred skull fragment beneath ash in the Rift Valley, East Africa. Not from a wildfire, but a sign that humans then already knew how to use fire. Perhaps to cremate or bury their dead. A first glimpse into culturally driven behavior. These are not mere artifacts. They are not just subjects of research. They are whispers left behind by those who lived before us. There is no writing, but there are tools. No books, but there is memory. Etched in stone, in bone, in earth. No recorded music, but there were songs. When a mother lulled her child to sleep by the rhythm of her breath, the side of fire. Today, what remains is not just in the ground. It's in us, in our genetic structure, in our behavioral instincts, in our survival reflexes. Modern humans still carry the DNA of those ancestors. The way we learn through observation, the way we tell stories, the way we follow groups, the way we remember paths, recognize faces, avoid danger. all are products of hundreds of thousands of years of adaptation. The language we use, though now more complex, still follows the primal structure of communication: symbols, sounds, strings of meaning. Our visual thinking, from art to expression, traces back to those first humans who carved animal shapes onto cave walls, not to decorate, but to warn, to remember, to pass on. Earth, 300,000 years ago, is not a fairy tale world, nor a forgotten myth. It is a different version, primitive, unshaped, of this very world. We are walking on their land, touching the stones they once touched, breathing the air they once breathed, though now changed. And if we are quiet enough, patient enough, we might hear something. Not the wind, not the birds, but the first footsteps of humankind, echoing through the centuries from an untold past into an ongoing present.